You are listening to The Unpredictable. In this episode, we are going to talk about a very interesting side of poetry. And we are going to focus on the power of the verse in it. And of course, you will hear an unpredictable thing and the way how to deal with it at the end of this episode. I am hosting Martin Bidney, Professor Emeritus at Binghamton University in New York, author of 50 books of poetry. I believe he is going to tell us very important things about his unique dialogue style poetry. Welcome, Mr. Bidney.
Thank you. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bidney. Thank you for being with us. I have some specific questions about your book, Sonnets Hybridized. But I would like to start with this question before turning the pages of this fine book. You do have published 50 poetry books, and I believe you are still working on a new project. Why are you still writing? What is the thing about poetry that makes you glued to writing? What is your dedication source?
Well, I'll tell you, it comes from a very exciting thing that happened to me, which I thought was going to be a disaster. One day, as I approached the time when my retirement, which I prefer to call rewirement because that's what it turned into, my retirement was approaching, I began to feel excruciating pains in both my wrists. And I learned that I had carpal tunnel in both of them, and that I also had another inflammatory syndrome, cubital tunnel in both of them. That's a total of 4 nerve diseases. And I didn't feel terribly happy about this. I really thought I had no idea what would happen to me. But luckily, I had a friend who counteracted the stroke of bad luck with a stroke of extremely good luck. He handed me a copy of the latest issue of Smithsonian Magazine, where there was an article by America's foremost neurologist who specializes in the repetitive stress injuries of musicians. The doctor told me, and he has written a book about this, he has made it clear that you can cure it yourself with exercises. So, simple and primitive cure. Oh, you just have to be obsessively thorough about it, and then in 5 weeks you're done. So I was delighted, and I looked forward to my soon recovery. But then there was one thing I didn't like about the prescription. He said, stay away from the violin, because he thought that would compound the difficulties of the cure. The violin makes the wrists do all kinds of complicated things, and if you're trying to cure them, you should not play. Well, I'm a violinist, and I am used to playing music, and I became indignant. I became positively angry that I should have to, so to speak, take such a complete fast from my chief source of musical nourishment. And so what I did was I went to the computer and I said, I'm going to try a new kind of music. I am going to try to make music with words. I want to think of the most beautiful musical poem I know. And I happened to have a very good one in mind. It was called Love, and it was written in Russian by Vyacheslav Ivanov. And I had translated it, or not translated it, but when I was a teenager, I memorized it. Teenagers like to memorize poems about love, or at least I did. And I still had it with me as I approached my rewirement age, and I could recite it, and I did. And I dictated it to myself by heart, and I typed out my translation in musical English. I never thought I could do that, but it seemed to me a very beautiful thing, and it seemed to me, moreover, miraculous. So what I did was I took it to the lady who teaches creative writing, specializing in verse in our English department, and I said, well, what do you think of this I made? She said, do a dozen and I'll print them in my journal.
That's amazing.
Isn't that wonderful? That's
Yes.
the Patterson Literary Review was the journal, and it was printed there. And since then, that got me off Ever since then, I've been translating and replying, and we can talk for a few minutes in a while about my fortune teller technique. But I start with some work of amazing power and beauty, and then I try to make it into correspondingly lovely English. And here's why I'm so dedicated. I didn't make this discovery that I could create a thing like that until I was about 60, 61 years old. Mm-hmm. Now I am 80, and in the last 19 years, I have published my, not 49, but 50 books mm-hmm. of poetry, translations, yes. and original verse, and very often combining the two in interview form. Another version of my fortune teller idea is interview. I like to have dialogues, conversations mm-hmm. with some other poet. So I didn't know I had this gift, but it's an amazing gift. You know why? Because I can write beautiful music in English in any rhythm you like and any rhyme scheme you like. And why did I never think I could do that before? I think it's partly the sense that that we have, a very unfortunate sense, that writing immortal verse, as it's sometimes called, is the prerogative of geniuses. I thought it took a special kind of a spirit. It's really a kind of racism of the spiritual world. There are those of us who have the gift of genius, and they sit in the front of the bus, and there are the rest of us who fill the back. Well, I gave up the idea of genius. I really think it had did me a lot of harm. You see, I would read an ode by Keats, or let's say the ode on autumn, which is my favorite, mm-hmm. or Kubla Khan by Coleridge, or Adonais by Shelley, or some passages of Paradise Lost by Milton, and I would be so overwhelmed by their power and beauty, it would be like listening to the most gorgeous music. That's why I started the worship of geniuses, which did me so much harm, because I had to sit in the back of the bus. No more of that. All of a sudden, I could do it.
Wow, that's perfect. I mean, this story is amazing. I'm so impressed, because it started with a pain, wrist pain, and then you realize that.
And then extreme pleasure.
Yes,
pain. Yes.
That's an awesome story.
No, I can't stop. I write day and night. I love to write. I don't deprive myself of sleep. I'm capable of taking 12-hour naps. That's not a problem. I'm a very sleeper. I don't know what insomnia might be. So I've never suffered from it. So I just can write and write and write. And that's what I will do until my credit card and I both expire.
Wow. Wow, that's so funny. But yeah, I wish you a healthy and a very long life, Mr. Bidney. So I'm going to ask this question. I have read these beautiful lines at the end of the poem Therapy 1, in this Sonnets Hybridized.
Okay.
I would like to read them, if you don't mind. It's on page 29, and let me find it. Yes, here it is. These beautiful lines. Glad am I for sonnet therapy. The power of the word takes care of me. So my question is, do you think words get more power in poetry than the other genres?
Oh, absolutely. Because you marshal emotional and imaginative resources. You always are saying something, mm-hmm. but in a deeper sense, nothing at all is said. You sing everything.
Yes.
People who think they're saying something, sometimes people have given me poems to look at, and I suggested, no, you can't write this because it's so ugly. The rhythm is destroyed, and as far as the vowel and consonant harmonies, they are absent. And then the person says, but that's what I wanted to say. Well, I say, I have to say at that point, give up that plan and don't say anything. Sing everything.
Wow, sing everything. That's great, Mr. Bidney. So before I read this book, Sonnets Hybridized, I had a look at the foreword. You are saying that you focused on guidance you got from reading the Quran with your fortune teller method. I will ask some specific questions about some poems, but can you please tell me something about this guidance first? What does it mean, how it works, and How do you apply this guidance into your poetry?
Well, it happens that I noticed a copy of the Quran in the English department office on the free books table. It was huge. It had thousands and thousands of notes. It's the Yusuf Ali translation, which is the most scholarly perhaps that was ever made, and astonishing a feat of scholarly labor. I took it home and I didn't know what to do with it. I thought I would read it and see what happened. Actually, I found it rather dull to read. So I thought, well, this is Mr. Yusuf Ali's attempt to convey it. Maybe someone else will do a better job. So I went to Barnes & Noble and I looked at all the Qurans they had in English. And indeed, most of them seemed dead to me. They didn't move my heart. But there was one by Marmaduke Pickthall, which he did in 1922. I think it was 22 when it was first published in India. The date usually given is 1930 when it came out in England. Anyway, that's 100 years ago, roughly. And he translates. He was an Englishman, and he converted to Islam only as an adult. So I think myself that the secret to him is that he has the best of both worlds. He probably got plenty of King James reading, Bible reading when young. The official authorized version, as it's called, written for the Church of England by the committee that King James established during Shakespeare's lifetime, which just happens to be the golden age of the flowering of English, so that it's as the King James Bible is as great a work of literature as the works of Shakespeare. I would say they're neck and neck, competitive runners in the race. And I say this because when I read Pickthall, I also found an amazing quality, a set of qualities, the ones that I found also in the King James. I love to call that book my King James Quran because it's filled with both archaisms. He's right. This is a book. The Quran was written in the 600s of the current era. That's an old book, so an archaic style is in place. But also there's a vigor. There's a vigor to his writing. You could say somebody might describe restless horses. What does he say? Snorting coursers. That's wonderful.
Wow.
Coursers mean you see them running. That's from the word, the Latin word for running, and then you can hear them too, breathing deeply. Well, so that's just an example of what he does. And sometimes the wordings are a bit quirky. He always says portents when he means omens, and he doesn't seem to realize that a portent is rather a bad omen usually in English. But so there are a few quirks, but mainly you'll be thrilled. And very often the passages will be in rhythms that you are familiar with from English poetry. Very often a passage from Pickthall's Quran will almost be a perfectly metered English poem. And so, I love this. You can see what the fortune teller in me starts to do. He wants to open his book at random, start to read, and write a verse reply if he likes what he hears.
I'm going to ask a question in order to elaborate on this topic. In one of your videos, you're saying that there's a poetizing power in the Quran equal to Jewish and Christian scriptures. So how about the Jewish and Christian scriptures? Can you tell us something about them? Have you ever worked on them in the same way with Quran? Or
yes. In fact, I have been devoted to scripture pretty much all my life because when I was a boy, I was taught Hebrew, and my father, who was still scared by what happened to us in this Jews in the Second World War, was too shy to go out to synagogue, and so he made me the house prayer reader, like a kind of mullah, and I read welcoming the Sabbath in Hebrew every week for more than 10 years to our family, even though my mother and sister didn't understand Hebrew. I tried to dramatize it to make the music flow, and in this way I had to at least make tentative guesses as to what the meter was. Most people have no idea that the Psalms of David are written in meter, and Psalms of David are the chief content of the welcoming the Sabbath on Friday evening service. So I would read those Psalms. I have them in my head to this day. Tov ladot l'Adonai zamer shimcha elyon, lagid bavoker chastecha v'emunatcha balinot. You can perhaps hear that they have strong beats, heavy syllables, but in between there can be varying numbers of weak or unstressed syllables. But beats are important, and in the beat scheme, I have actually written a book called Modern Psalms in Ancient Rhythm, and I wrote all 99 of them in King David's rhythms. Usually you have 3s and 4. Every David phrase or verse has 2 parts. Usually the 2 parts say pretty much the same thing. I would call it the formula of A prime, B prime. The beats in the 2 halves can be apportioned as 3 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 3, or 4 and 4, or else you can do a 2 and 3 scheme. Those are the 2 most common schemes that I found. But because you don't know always, you never know how many beats the next part will have, because of this extreme latitude for freedom of choice of the meter for each half of the verse. That's why people got confused. I asked a Hebrew teacher recently in our neighborhood what he tells the students about the rhythm of the Psalms if they ask him, and he says, I tell them that the Lord alone knows what it is. Well, that's not, you don't have to go quite that far. The meter was actually explained to me by a professor named Samuel Morel, who had an office across the hall from me. We had plenty of conversations about it. So that started me out with Hebrew, and then when it came time for me to write a dissertation, I wanted to learn more about English literature. You see, I majored in Russian, and I took a master's from Harvard in Russian, but I wanted to more comparative scope, so I took my PhD in English, and then I wanted to write a dissertation that would combine different English fields. So I wrote about Ruskin's uses of Dante. That gave me a double education in 2 great masters, one of Italian literature and one of English. So they were visionary works. Then I got interested in one of the greatest visionaries who ever lived, both as one working in both painting and words, and that is William Blake. I loved Blake, and I was wondering, with my interest in other languages and comparing things and bringing things together in dialogue, was there another romantic who excited me as much as Blake? And it seemed to me that Goethe would be the man, because Faust is generally regarded as Germany's greatest poem, and it's right in the same time frame as Goethe. They were living at the same time, and they were both writing these mental pioneer poems, exploring the resources of the human mind, and doing so for decades. The poem "The Four Zoas" by Blake took him at least 20 years to write, and Goethe's Faust took 60. So these are big projects, introspective projects. And so I took my sabbatical as a study sabbatical at Stanford, and I studied German literature all year. And then I was ready to write a book. My first book is called Blake and Goethe. These are 2 very great visionaries raised in the Christian tradition. I had to learn all kinds of Christian scriptures. You know, Blake cites the Judeo-Christian Bible on every page, several times usually. You have to learn a lot. And Goethe's citations are also many, and he throws in plenty of Greek mythology, as so did Blake. They like to range wide. So that there was a intensive training in Christian visionary literature. And in the last 3rd period of my life, I became interested in Islam. And that partly happened because a friend of mine, who was also my German teacher, asked me to translate Goethe's poem about Islamic culture. A lot of people know Goethe as the author of Faust. You probably were aware that he
Yes.
wrote a big poem called Faust.
Yes.
Were you aware that he wrote one called West-East Divan?
Yes, I was. It's a collection, right? Goethe's readings of a Persian poet.
I translated it. That's Goethe, and down at the bottom is Hafiz.
Mm-hmm.
It happens, you see, that Hafiz, or Hafiz as it should probably be pronounced, but in the Germans always say Hafiz. What Goethe did was he stumbled upon the newest and the first into any European language translation of Hafiz, 14th century Divan, which means collection, and he was charmed. He was charmed. It was made into such beautiful musical German by Joseph von Hammer. And so he wrote a book that he called West-East Collection, which means I am going to take on the role that Hafiz had, and I won't stop being a late 18th, 19th century German. But in many of my poems, I'm simply going to call myself by an Arabic name, and I will put on the clothing, the role, and the mentality of Hafiz. The interesting thing that is so surprising, because we think of Goethe as such a serious writer, is that Hafiz is a tavern poet. A lot of people think Islam and then they think no wine. And that's true enough for some countries. In Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they don't look very Islamic orthodoxy and tradition has not looked very kindly upon drinkers. But Persia is wine-growing country, and you can't stop the people from having splendid fertile vineyards. And so you got in among the Sufis, especially the rebellious mystics, a cult of wine as symbol of love. It can be love for God, for a man, for a woman, for nature, for the universe in general, for love itself. And so this is exciting. It was exciting for Goethe to relax. He has a section of this book which is all about sitting in the tavern. There isn't a profound idea in it. It's all about looking around and seeing who the people are, and enjoying the notion that you really don't have any time frame. You don't have any deadlines. You can just be yourself for a while and find out who that is. Wow. So taking on the role of Hafiz was quite liberating. Goethe was actually experiencing a writer's block with respect to Faust, and this broke open the gates. It freed him to experiment with new ideas, particularly Oriental ideas, and he started in the latter part of Faust to introduce materials from the Arabian Nights. He disguised this by giving them classical Greek names, and this has confused the poor, weary scholars for a couple of hundred years. But my teacher, Katharina Mommsen, made it very clear what Goethe had been doing. Anyway, I got very excited about Persian pub poetry and about Goethe and about Islamic culture, and that's when I started to read the Quran, and that's when I started looking for good Qurans and came up with Pickthall.
Let's go back to the book. I'm going to ask a question specifically about a sonnet again. The poem Haste, which is available on the 52nd page. There's a verse from the Quran on the top of the poem, and it says, "Man is made of haste. I shall show you my portents, but ask me not to hasten." So this is a very beautiful poem, but I would like to read only the last two lines again, and I will ask my question. You are saying that at the end of this poem, "I'm patient, for the one who treasure brings reveals the queen of the queens, the king of the kings." What does queen of queens, king of kings mean here? And what do you want to tell your readers with these lines?
Well, it's an adaptation of my mixed background. King of kings is the standard phrase to refer to the Jewish God. in the hymn with which we greet the Sabbath Queen with her host of angels who comes to bring peace to your home every Friday evening at sundown. We say Shalom Aleichem, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malchei HaMlachim, from the King of the Kings of Kings, the Holy One, be blessed. It's from Hebrew scripture, and I put in the Queen of Queens because I am not a patriarch. God is no more a man than a woman.
Wow, this is a great point. Yeah, seriously, I like this point. That's good. Mr. Bidney, you have a massive poetry. Do you have a favorite one?
My favorite is the one I happen to be writing about today. In other words, on any day. In other words, I cannot count my favorites, and I cannot give them ranks. In the spirit world, there's no ranks. For example, let's look at the word enthusiasm. The thu is from Greek, and it's the same as the the that's in theology.
Yes.
Theology is supposed to be the study of God.
Yes.
Enthusiasm means having God in you. Now, if you have the feeling that somehow God is in me and making me write poetry, there's no up or down, there's no high or low, but the infinite is in a finite space. So what we do in the spirit world is generally ignore apparent contradictions.
Mr. Bidney, as I mentioned at the very beginning, normally at the end of the episode, I'm asking my guests to tell us an unpredictable thing they had to deal with. However, you told us an inspiring story once we started this conversation. This is my takeaway here. Even when you are going through a very bad time, never give up and find a new way to fix the issue and feed your soul. Mr. Bidney, thank you very much for your generous answers. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Dear listeners, if you hear me now, you have listened to this episode all the way to the end. Thank you. Please don't forget to like and share this episode. And please come back next Monday. My guest and I will be here. Stay tuned.